Okay, so now that we have talked about short distance transport of water from the soil into the steel or into the vascular tissue of the root, now we need to talk about long distance transport. How does the water that has now been collected by the root through the root hairs and now it's in the xylem, how does that get up to the leaves where it's needed? Do y'all remember why the leaves need water? Water is required for photosynthesis. So the water that is being collected by the roots needs to get all the way up to the leaves so that the plant can do photosynthesis and so it can make sugars and maintain itself. Okay, so long distance transport requires a mechanism that involves 3 steps or 3 different components: transpiration, cohesion, and adhesion. And these are going to be regulated by the stomata, as we will see. Okay, so in this figure you can see that the plant is gathering water through the roots, and the water is moving up, in this case through the tree, and it's going to eventually make it to the leaves. I don't want you to worry about this high water potential, low water potential stuff here from the atmosphere. We're not going to deal with that at all. Okay, one other thing I need you to remember though is that in a leaf, the veins of the leaves are actually vascular tissue. So that's going to be your xylem and your phloem. Again, we're only talking about xylem in this video, but the xylem is going to be within these different veins, and you can see that the veins are found throughout the leaf, which allows water, basically, and nutrients to get to all of the cells in the leaf. Okay, so if we're to look at this up close, here's the xylem. This is the vascular tissue right here. Here's the xylem, and it's showing you that there's a bunch of water molecules that are all connected to each other. We'll talk about that in a second too. And when water needs to move into the different parts of the leaf from the xylem, it can move down through here, and in this case it's showing that it is moving into the spongy mesophyll. Okay, so the first step is transpirational pull. Transpiration is another word for evaporation from a leaf. So when water evaporates from a leaf through the stoma or stomata, which remember are those little openings at the bottom of the bottom surface of the leaf. So when water evaporates from a leaf, that's called transpiration. And that is essentially the first step in moving water from the roots up the stem and to the leaves. Water leaves, is eliminated or evaporates from the leaves, and it's going to essentially leave a place for more water to occupy. So when leaves release water through the stomata, then that water gets replaced from the cell's cytoplasm, and that is going to reduce the water potential of that cell. So as we talked about before, when water moves in and out of a plant cell based on water potential, this is where that comes into play. So if a cell loses some water, now there's a low water potential, and it's going to cause more water from an adjacent cell to move in. So a cell that has just lost some water due to transpiration is going to have low water potential, and then water is going to be more likely to enter that cell from an adjacent cell. And when that happens, water is going to move into that cell from an adjacent cell. So it forms like a sort of a pathway that water follows based on differences in water potential between adjacent cells. And remember, cells that have low water potential are going to have water coming into them from adjacent cells that have higher water potential. So it sort of acts like a straw from the leaf being the top of the straw all the way down to the roots, which would be like the bottom of the straw where the water is that you're drinking. There's negative or low water potential up here, and that's going to draw water up the whole way, drawing water up from the roots and into the leaves, and then out the leaves through evaporation. And it works really well as long as the chain of water remains unbroken from the roots to the leaves. So similarly, if you had a hole in your straw, which would break that chain of water, then your straw wouldn't work anymore. So it's really important that the chain of water remains intact, or else this transpirational pull won't work. So how do we maintain that chain of water? Well, that is maintained through basically cohesion and adhesion. I think I need to move this down here so you can see that better. Okay, so we're going to talk about what each of these things are. Cohesion is the attraction of water molecules to each other. So water uses hydrogen bonds, which are really strong, to connect to one another, basically to attach to one another. So hydrogen bonds are really strong, and that is one way that the water stays connected and the long chain of water stays intact. So not only do we have cohesion of water molecules to each other, we also have adhesion, which is when the water molecules are bonding to the wall of the xylem and the leaf mesophyll cell walls. So here you can see that the water is bonding not only to each other itself, but also to the walls of the spongy mesophyll. And those things together are making sure that that chain of water doesn't break. You can also see that the water molecules are attached to one another within this xylem in the vein of the leaf, but they're also attaching and bonding to the edges of the xylem. And here we can see water again in the xylem, the tracheids of the stem, and you can see that the water molecules are attached to each other through cohesion, and they are also kind of stuck to the edges of the tracheids through adhesion. And both of these mechanisms involve hydrogen bonds, which are really strong bonds. So because they are kind of stuck to the sides of the xylem cells and also stuck to each other, these forces essentially keep the chain going, and they are really important forces in fighting the other force of gravity, which would be pulling those water molecules down. But so you've got this transpirational pull, pulling water out. The water is connected. Water molecules are sort of connected to one another, and they're connected to all of these different parts of the cells that they are going through. And because they are stuck to each other, it's sort of like pulling a chain. And as long as that chain doesn't break, then that transpirational pull can drive the movement of the water from the roots up through the leaves. Here's a video that will show you that process in some other words.
How do water and minerals get to the leaves? Although roots can exert a slight upward pressure, it is evaporation of water from leaves, a process called transpiration, that moves water molecules and ions up from the roots. Transpiration exerts a pull that is relayed downward along a string of water molecules from leaf to root. Hydrogen bonds cause water molecules to stick together, a phenomenon called cohesion. As each water molecule evaporates, it pulls on the next water molecule, and it pulls on the next. This relays the pull of evaporating water molecules all the way down to the roots. The adhesion of water to walls of the xylem cells helps to keep gravity from pulling the water molecules back down. As each water molecule escapes from the leaf, it pulls a column of water molecules upward. Solutes are transported along with the water. Thus, the plant xylem uses the movement of evaporating water molecules, cohesion, and adhesion to draw water and dissolved minerals from the soil into its roots and upward to its leaves. Hot, dry, windy conditions increase transpiration. If not enough water moves up from the soil to replace the water lost to evaporation, the plant will wilt and it could die. How does a plant prevent excessive water loss? An opening in a leaf is called a stoma. Stomata are generally open during the day to allow carbon dioxide into the leaf, where it is used in photosynthesis. While the stomata are open, water moves out of the leaf by transpiration. This allows the plant to move water and minerals to the leaf, and the evaporation of water also functions to cool the plant. If hot, dry conditions require the plant to conserve water, guard cells close the stomata. This is a trade-off. Although closing the stomata reduces water loss, this also slows down photosynthesis and may cause the plant to overheat.
Okay, so we hadn't talked about all of those things, but I'm going to review a little bit more about the stomata in just a second. But what we want to do real quick is just have a real quick review of what that means, this whole transpiration, cohesion, adhesion pathway of long-distance transport. So again, the movement of the xylem sap, which is water and nutrients, against gravity is maintained by this mechanism. We have a difference in water potential that is driving water to move from one cell to the next, and essentially it's driven by transpiration from the leaves, which is pulling water out of the leaves, and then like a straw, the difference in water potential from adjacent cells is tugging water molecules from adjacent cells all the way down to the roots. And because it is transpiration, it's evaporation, essentially it's being powered by the sun. As water molecules evaporate, then more water is being pulled in from the soil. So it's kind of an interesting process that is being driven by the sun. Okay, finally we're going to talk about stomata and how the stomata are driving this whole thing. So these are the guard cells. There's 2 guard cells on either side of a stoma. The opening is the stoma. And as that video was just saying, there's sort of a trade-off between gas exchange and water loss. So plants need to maintain a certain level of water, so they need to conserve water. And when they are in trouble and they really need to conserve water, they close this stoma so that transpiration doesn't occur, evaporation doesn't occur. Typically, though, if the plant has enough water, during the day, the stoma is open and carbon dioxide is coming in to help fuel photosynthesis. So carbon dioxide comes in and water leaves. When the water evaporates, it's actually bringing more water up from the roots, which is going to also facilitate photosynthesis. So water's coming up from the roots, carbon dioxide is coming in through the stomata, and those are the materials that the plant needs for photosynthesis. So when and why do the stomata open and close? Typically, in normal conditions, the stomata open during the day and they close at night so that gas exchange and transpiration can be happening and photosynthesis can work. And some of the things that trigger the opening of the stomata are light. So at dawn, when the light starts, when the sun comes up, the stomata on a plant open. Also, if carbon dioxide is really, really low inside a leaf, then the stomata will open to allow carbon dioxide in, which again is needed for photosynthesis. And there's also an internal clock that essentially is like a circadian rhythm in animals. The stomata open around the same time every single day in a 24-hour cycle, similar to what we animals have. Okay, and so that's the end of the material for exam 2. I will send you all an email about other information that you need.